Awesome. All right. Hello, everyone. So we're gonna talk about Balaji's podcast, episode one. Sayeb, do you want to give us an introduction of what this podcast is about?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give my little spiel, and then Matt, feel free to jump in when I'm done. So, Balaji on the Moment of Zen podcast talked about this idea of like tribal lens, um, and it kind of goes into his larger thesis of the network state, and he kind of sees what's happening sort of globally, but I think he specifically talked a lot about America and San Francisco, about how it's sort of fractalizing and sort of fragmenting into these different tribes. And these different tribes have sort of identity to one another, and how those different identities or those different tribes want to operate and want society to behave. And so we really wanted this discussion because I believe tribes are made of people, and we wanted to see like what perspective that people had about this. That's kind of where we at. Where I'm at, Matt.
Yeah, maybe just to take a step back for a second, it'd be helpful to kind of just explain what, for people who didn't listen to the podcast because it's very, very long, what is the tribal lens? He kind of details it at the beginning, but it really takes the full episode to talk about it. So basically the idea is like what you described, right? Like there are different tribes. It's more helpful to view them as tribes than political parties because people are very ideologically motivated. America kind of, as time goes on, becomes more ideologically aligned as opposed to just like political party. And he talks about three tribes in the episode, three main tribes at least. There's the blues, the reds, and the grays. The blues are the progressives and like the people in power. And he talks about them kind of fighting a war on all fronts. They're fighting the reds, they're fighting the grays, they're fighting Russia and China. And their idea basically is maintain the system of power, maintain institutions. The progressives in San Francisco, the Democrats in power. In my opinion, to inject a little bias, like basically anyone Balaji perceives as kind of on the left in whatever area he wants to make his argument is a blue. My thought process is kind of like they're not all connected. They're not all on the same side. But anyway, so the blues, right? Then there were the reds. Reds are like really conservatives, like by political party. Basically, like people who are conservative. They want to sort of maintain the past, restore traditional values, that kind of thing. And then there are the grays, and the grays. The most interesting party, in my opinion, like he kind of talks about them as this techno utopian kind of new technology, the future, startup founders, technology builders, like that kind of party. And he really introduces this idea of a third party, which I think people have talked about in a bunch of different areas, maybe not in the sense of like technology as that third party, but there's a big sense in the country, and there always has been, of like people want a third thing. They want something, they don't feel welcome in either party. And I think a lot of this is like Balaji's attempt to kind of crystallize that potential third thing into a party. And then I guess the other part of it that I think we'll get into is he kind of lays out a strategy of how the grays can project influence and really take back land, specifically in San Francisco, but kind of more writ large. And he discusses the idea that grays have been historically very bad at this. In San Francisco, there's this quip that tech people are very transient. They're not very involved in local politics. And he kind of talks about how that might be able to change. So maybe I'll stop there. There's a big meetup component. There's a big like kind of organizing component, which we can get into. But that's kind of the outlying thesis.
I think we all have a lot of thoughts and comments, but around this podcast. But we want to start off with these two guests we have. We have Adrienne and Tim. They're going to share their hot takes around this episode. And so we're going to start off with hearing both of them out, and then we'll open up to a roundtable discussion. So Adrienne, we'll start off with you. Just quickly introduce yourself and then share your overall thoughts of what you had around this podcast and some like open questions that you want to discuss with us, and just any broader ideas.
Sure. I'm Adrienne at Adrienne on Farcaster. I want to talk also not just kind of about this specific podcast, but about like Balaji's broader work.
Sure, yeah.
And things he's talked about, and the network state. Has everyone here read? Did you guys read the network state? So I'm like
It's a long book. I've read through. good chunk of it.
But how cool was the format of it? He's like, read first chapter. It's like a blog post. Read the second
Correct.
chapter. It's like the outline. Read the whole thing. And it's real, like how it was designed to be this hyperlinked. Anyway, so start off by saying like I'm a really big fan of Balaji's, of his thinking, of his writing, speaking. Like just truly impressed by the polymath of like what does he not know about, and even like just the vision and being able to kind of like look at trends and see forward. So huge fan. I read the Network State, and it like just really spoke to me. So just like let's talk, which is really about identity. So I grew up, and Tyab, we talked about this I think when we met a few months ago, but like I grew up, I'm multiracial. I have my mom is Mongolian, my dad is white, my mom was Buddhist, my dad was Jewish. So like just came from just lots of different cultures in my family. I'm a woman. I always like was way into STEM as a kid, and just like was better in science and math, and kind of went into engineering, worked in tech for a long time. So was always like the only woman on a team. So like, I just always felt like I was being able to kind of float in different tribes and being really comfortable, but never finding like that one tribe that I was like, oh, these are like truly me. And that was kind of like the superpower for me, because I felt like, oh, this is good. I've got all different kinds of friends. Want to hear my nickname in college?
Yeah, what is it?
What?
Which is a joke, but it was Shadrian, as in because I was shady, because I was in like the Greek system at a Big Ten school. All my friends were like one tribe, but I had all these other friends. Like I just would always like disappear and go with my other friends. So it was like, that was the joke. It's like, you're so shady. I was not, maybe a little, but that was it. It was like, there was never the one place, and my life was rich because you could kind of find. So just reading a lot of Balaji and hearing and finding what we'll now label the gray tribe, I was like, oh, found my people. I didn't have internet friends a few years ago. Wasn't at, like it was kind of starting, and I've made so many internet friends. I've been like really opened up my kind of, I don't know, my life has changed over the last few years through Twitter, through meeting people, certainly through Farcaster. So I kind of just loved it. So I was just expecting to like eat up everything Balaji's saying on this episode. Really enjoyed it until kind of, I want to say like towards the end, when it's like, okay, well, great. Now you've got the blues and the reds, and the answer is we're the gray tribe and we're going to win, and, and we're going to go to war. So I just like my personal lens to be like, I just identify my tribe as the anti-tribe. Like I don't want to be in a tribe, because I've never found one that it's like, yep, this is my tribe. So that was all. It's like, how do it didn't total, I don't know, just me personally. And again, and Ty, you and I chatted on this on Farcaster, but my initial emotional response was like, no, I don't want to hear this. And then I was like, all right, I know that's emotional. I'm going to wait, because again, is that the effective way? Like I believe in gray values. I believe in kind of gray vision, but is that necessarily the most effective way to bring about this future? I have other thoughts too that I'll wait till later once we kind of do the discussion, but that's my initial hot takes on the episode 1.
Yeah. Who also decided to label it gray? Like, could there not have been a more interesting color? Like kind of like purple.
Well, I mean,
it's also like red and blue make purple, so it's like, oh, actually purple kind of.
Yeah, that actually would have been a kind of slam dunk.
Right? It would have been kind of perfect.
But red and blue is such a U.S. angle, right? Which
Correct.
I also is like, oh, U.S. politics, and I'm kind of the world of like, let's not center the U.S. as the center of gravity for the world.
Okay.
But
I think that's fair.
So,
I think that's fair.
But I will notice Tyab and Matt in blue shirts, Tim in gray. Notice
Like,
this is
actually
like completely
gray. This is gray.
accidental.
I should change my shirt then.
Dark gray.
But if you notice, like I'm living up to my brand of the anti-tribe. I didn't even plan this, but I went tie-dye.
Awesome.
Awesome.
We can open this back up to discussion, but we can give it to Tim to give his perspective. Unless you want to take it in a different direction, Ishika.
No, I just wanted to ask Adrienne if you had any like open questions when you like kind of watched this episode. Did you have any questions or concerns about anything he was saying?
I'm looking at some of my notes that I take.
Yeah, I got my paper note here.
Yeah. And going back, interesting conversation on Farcaster, and throw it back that Mark had brought up a few weeks ago, if you know who Mark is, about like, how do you remember things from podcasts? So like I took a lot of like, what I do is when something resonates with me, I'm like, oh yeah, I take a note. In terms of questions, I think it really comes down to, Ishka, what I was saying was like, okay, great. Let's agree that we like gray values and the world would be better with more gray values. What's the most effective way at spreading them? And when the conversation goes to let's go by our elected officials and fight the blues and ally with the reds, and like it kind of, and again, it lost me there, but not because I won't maybe come around to it. I'm just not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I think that's a good question. How what is the most effective way of spreading gray values? Like, I think when he talks about like the whole starting off with San Francisco, it's like easier said than done because again, it's a shift in mindset, which is very difficult to do with people. Does anyone else have any thoughts around this? Like, I kind of just like think it's right now it's easier said than done, and putting it into like actual action, it's I don't know how you would go about doing that.
I
Well,
have
there are
one, but
people putting it into action, right?
Matt.
Like Gary Tan, right? He's not running for office, but he is definitely using Twitter to the best of his abilities to put gray values into action, so to speak. There's been rumblings here and there of like, various people that may eventually run for office, right? So there are people that are thinking about doing it, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's more subtle, right? It's not just like, oh, declare a gray flag, like start like cordoning off blocks, right? Like no one's really doing that at this point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think like before, I really want to give Tim some time. So like, I don't want to go into this too long and then kind of want to open it up for the roundtable. But like, what are gray values? Like, I don't, honestly, until this podcast, I'd never heard of gray, to be honest with anybody here. He kind of talks about it with just like internet values, because he was saying like, we don't want Western values, we want internet values. And I would say like, I would probably agree with him that I have internet values more than I have Western values. But like my definition of what internet values might be different than somebody else's. And so I would say like before we can like spread values, we have to actually kind of identify what are the values. So that's kind of my perspective.
Cool. All right. Yeah. I mean, now, Tim, we'd love to hear your thoughts, overall, your thoughts, questions, concerns, broader ideas. What's on your mind with this podcast?
Yeah, no, I love Adrienne's. I love the anti-tribe, and then she comes in tie-dye. That's the best. So yeah, I'm TLDR on Farcaster, and my background is actually in political philosophy, like specifically like classical political philosophy. So like I've done a lot of thinking about kind of the origins of the city state and the polis, like from at least like in how it was conceived in the Western tradition. So like a lot of my thinking about Balaji is actually about Balaji's thinking is influenced by like what I consider like a novel contribution to political philosophy. So like that's super interesting to me. Like I'm really like a big fan of the way he rethinks things from first principles in everything, but like also in this, and also like how he doesn't just think about it, but tries to put what he's doing into action in like a very entrepreneurial kind of thought leader kind of sort of way. So like, that's like broadly what appeals to me about Balaji. I also, because I'm building in crypto, like, and he's so active and influential and thoughtful in crypto, like that's another reason that I kind of connect with his thinking. In terms of this recent podcast, like my high level experience of it was, I think that Balaji has stayed true to his fundamental insight, like what I consider his political philosophical insight, which I can just sort of express what I think that is in a second. I think he stays true to that, but he's experimenting with different tactics and strategies for implementing. And I think that the experiment that I thought he was running this time was, everybody thinks that I'm a doomer because I said that Bitcoin was going to basically like flip the United States. And what if I come out with a positive vision of what we can build and something that could actually improve the United States, in even if it started in like a hyper local way. So I think my overall experience was that Balaji's trying a new tactic, like as a political philosophical entrepreneur. He's like, hey, like this last thing I tried like didn't land as well. What about if I go this way? And like, I'm going to focus on the Gray Tribe being a thing. And I'm going to, focus on the positive steps that we could take in a very specific area. So just to go back to like what I think is so interesting about his fundamental insight that hasn't changed is that I think Balaji is saying, humans, when we think of the ultimate human coordination, it's politics. The ultimate version of human coordination is a polity, a state, a city, whatever, right? An empire, it doesn't matter. Nation, whatever we call it. But he's like, the internet is changing things because we spend so much of our time now interacting with each other's ideas that seems almost, it seems as primary, like it seems like either another element or even sometimes more primary than where our bodies are spending time. And so I think that like every nation state throughout the history of political philosophy has considered the landed location as the fundamental element. Where are the bodies and who has power over the material, conditions of those bodies? That's like the essence of every political organization. And I think Balaji's core insight is, as we shift more of our value, time, energy, ideology, thinking, passion into the digital sphere, and I care as much about this image that I own on the blockchain as I do about, the car that I'm driving or something. So like, this is super interesting stuff is happening, like, and we're a boiling frog right now. Like, it's just huge changes. And I think Balaji's primary point, from what I can tell, is what if we rethought like what politics is and didn't start with bodies in space, but started with ideas over the internet. And I think he's rethinking politics from first principle, from that premise. And to me, everything else that he's doing is about tactics of implementing the change and trying to create like a positive movement and building around that new conception. So like, to me, I guess my experience of the podcast is Balaji stayed very true to, the cloud cartography is a mapping of idea affinity rather than mapping physical. That's his core insight. I mean, that's an expression to me of his core insight. But then beyond that, it's like, okay, like, how do we get this going? And he's like, let's try like going all in on the Great Tribe. And I think it's a political rhetoric. I don't mean that in a negative sense. I don't mean that in a disparaging sense. I think it's a sledgehammer to try to get something going. And like, maybe we can all unite around this broad term and go into a spot and start doing some stuff. I really liked his move. Like, I prefer this building Balaji as opposed to predicting doom version of Balaji. Like, his core insight's the same, but I liked the building Balaji more. That energy's awesome. I'm wearing gray for a reason. Like, I like what he's doing. I want to be a part of that. And I thought of Eventcaster or Event. Like, I thought it was like, how is this stuff going to translate from ideas to the physical meetups and physical changes that we care about, and this bridge between the ideas and the IRL and the land, like that still needs to exist. Like we're still bodies that are in space. So yeah, I mean, I overall loved it. Thought it was very intriguing, and also thought directly about Matthew and like how he should be like at the head of the gray party. Like, you know, like the event should be like the center of this.
I actually had the same thought. I thought of Matt almost immediately when he started talking about meetups.
I definitely have thoughts there. Tim, I wanted to bring up one question though, maybe for the group, but also you kind of touched on it at the beginning, around like the idea of building and of improving things and of making change. Do you think that he's trying to improve the US or sort of salvage the parts in a way? Because I got this sense that he, and more generally, but especially in these two episodes, and especially in the first episode, he's less optimistic or sort of like intending to like improve the US in any sort of way, and more so trying to not do that. Or at the very least, does not have any reason to want to improve the US as opposed to like salvage what we can from it. And a couple of instances, he has this funny quip where he's like, I don't want the plane to go down. However, I am noting that the altitude is dropping. And like, I think he's right to some degree, right? But he's not trying to raise the altitude, it seems like, in these episodes so much as throw a bunch of the valuable cargo onto a plane that happens to be flying right next to it, right? And another example, right? Like you talk a lot about polarization and how like we should push it in that direction, you know, from this episode. However, I think if we zoom out of this, I would imagine many of us would argue that polarization is not a helpful way to resolve tensions and move forward as a society. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I'd love to open that question to you, Tim, and maybe the group. Like, do we think that he's fundamentally like trying to improve things in the US, or yeah, more so just like salvage the parts?
Tim, you go, and then I have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, my impression, and I wouldn't try to speak to like his intentions, but my impression is that I take him at his word when he's saying, you know, in passing during the podcast, that he's like, I don't want the US to be a failed state. Like, I think he appreciates what it's been able to produce the internet, right? Like, and he believes in what the internet can do for, like, you know, his project for education, you know, where he's trying to figure out, like, to find these talent that doesn't have access to the internet or doesn't have access to institutions. Like, I believe he believes that there's so much talent and energy in the global population, and the internet can unlock it. And I think he does think that's more interesting than any single nation state. And I think he openly admits that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. Like, you know, that he wishes the US as a nation state would do well. He doesn't wish it harm, but he's observing that it has major problems. But his true horse in the race is the internet itself and this new vision of politics. So I think if I'm a U.S. partisan looking at Balaji, I don't, you know, if I'm a pure U.S. partisan, I'm not thinking Balaji's on our team. It's like maybe we coordinate sometimes, but he doesn't want the U.S. to win. He's partisan to the whole globe and what the internet can be for the whole globe. And so I don't know what he wants. I do think he sees that the U.S. could be an epicenter. And I also believe him when he says, you know, the British, they were respected and it inspired something that America did, but America went off in a different direction. And he says, like, you know, America gave birth in many ways to internet and internet values, but it's okay if internet values respectfully say we're now going in a different direction. And that frame for me, I think, probably does align with what he really thinks. I don't think he wishes anybody harm, but I think his vision is global. And that means that sometimes the specific interests of the US don't align with his overall concern.
Yeah. Okay, so I think there's quite a bit to dive in. What does he want America to succeed? I actually don't know. I am much more of a skeptic in general, so I will say we'll see what Balaji's actions do to if he's trying to make America come together. I think the thing that he sees is sort of an inevitability. So right now you have polarization and you have continued more polarization. So these two parties, these two different groups of people, these two tribes are completely separate from one another. And you arguably have a third group of people who are kind of neither here nor there, and they kind of want the US to succeed. I would argue most people in this room are like that. But so he did mention something which is called partition. So partition is a very famous moment in time in Pakistani or the Indian subcontinent. India at the time it had several sort of empires that came through, but the British had colonized the Indian subcontinent for a very long time, and then post World War II, they ran out of the money to be able to rule that country. So what happened is they were like, okay, well, we need to let this thing self-govern, but Hindus and Muslims are so different from one another that they were like, does it make sense to have two groups of people who are very different from one another? Can they coexist? And look, I wasn't there and I probably don't know the history as well. But they decided that, and lots of like the leaders of those parties were like, we need two different nations, right? And he mentions that quite a bit, that like, do we have such polarization in red and blue that it almost makes sense for them to have two different nations and to govern themselves differently? Because I think the thing he talked about, and he mentions it many times, is like this idea of history is moving in reverse, or history is happening in reverse. And what had happened before is that we were many different tribes and we slowly centralized. People argue that the 1950s was peak centralization of the world, where the United States was like the unipolar power. And ever since then, we've actually sort of gradually gone back into a multipolar world. And now with crypto, with the internet, I would argue that there is even more power being shifted towards groups and individuals, that you get even more fragmentation. And I think he kind of just sees that happening, and that's what he's kind of just calling out.
Well, I had a question actually, like an open question around the way he's compared, partition with what's happening with the red and blue. I think with like politics, it's more of like your cognitive, it's like a cognitive territory, right? But with the partition, it was more religion focused. So can you really compare the two and say that the same is going to happen with the US? Because I think that's a complete different way of thinking, right? Like back then it was just religion based, right? Like now we're talking about mental models. Like you can have two different religions that think the same thing. So that was like an open question I have. Like just, I don't know if that partition analogy makes sense in this case, where he talks about red, blue, and then the gray. And then the second question I had, I think relates to what Tim was saying about how Balaji wishes for more of a global kind of unification rather than just the US. I think he's focused on the US because there's a lot of talent there, like he said, and you need that talent to succeed in order for the rest of the globe to kind of unite in a way. So with this gray tribe and like this internet tribe that he discusses, this cloud cartography, since it's internet value based, you cannot limit that to just a single nation, right? Internet will always be global. So that's like an area of confusion I have there. Like, how do you limit that to just like the US if internet is global? So those are like my two questions, or like open areas of discussion I wanted to bring up if anyone has thoughts.
Go ahead, Adrienne.
Yeah, I would say, I think on the first one, and this isn't necessarily my original thoughts, but kind of formal religion's been declining in the West, but the need for religion hasn't gone away. So what took the place is now my MSNBC or my Fox News is my religion. So even when you say, oh, we're polarized by party, and does it not, is that similar to the partition of India, right, and Pakistan, but maybe like I don't know. I can buy it, and
I actually have the same opinion as Adrienne. I think that religion
did you
may
call me
have gone.
Shadrian?
Sorry, no, I said Adrienne.
Oh, I was like, I thought you just called me Shadrian.
No, I'm not
Yes.
that quick-witted.
Amazing.
I would agree with Adrienne. I think religion may have declined, but the need for religion is a constant, and people find a new thing to attach themselves to, and the fervor of like belief that people have. I kind of feel like it's stronger on the right than it is on the left towards a party. But like you can see that it is almost as powerful as a religion for some people. So I wouldn't disagree that partition is possible.
I thought that as well, just like in terms of where it's stronger, but I think especially during the Trump era, seeing like when you're not in power, I don't know. I'm looking at some of my very left friends. Like it is, everything is the lens, and that does become, I can see, kind of more religious. Have you guys read the book *Sapiens*?
Yeah,
definitely. Everyone, I mean, like
yeah,
it takes a lot. Everyone's like, nah. Okay, so I read the graphic novel version, which is like the picture book. It was incredible.
The children's book.
It was a children's book, and I loved it. But I just felt also like I like what I'd gotten from that. The premise was like, what is the biggest technological advancement for humans was religion and storytelling. Like it's not firepower. It wasn't fire. It wasn't like any. It was the ability to tell stories and organize people. So I just, and when did we? That was like how many thousands of years ago, right? Like 2,000-3,000 years ago. And then, okay, but you're still like limited physically. So I was just thinking of that through the lens of, okay, well, what does the internet do? Well, I can tell my stories to the world. And who's going to listen to my stories? Like, it's not necessarily my neighbors, but people around the world.
Your digital neighbors.
Yeah, my digital neighbors. And I loved I know we're not talking about this yet, but I did love in the podcast the way Balaji talks about the cartography, like visualizing, just even of, oh, well, you had a bridge. Or some, like just the physical, like, and anyway, all right. You can trash *Sapiens* if you want, but I think there's something there that's related to the tribalism we're seeing.
I agree with you, Matt.
If I can kind of maybe tie this back to the point on religion from before, like I love *Sapiens*. I thought it was an interesting book, and the idea of this superpower of humanity being the ability to tell stories and to connect and to create tribes. Like one of the things I believe that the internet has done is made it way, way easier to do that, right? I mean, obviously, right? Like just connect people. But in some sense, right, that means it's way, way easier to create a tribe, right? I think like Moz is a tribe to some degree, right? Like All In is a tribe, right? Like they're at their summit right now. Right. And so if it becomes way, way easier to create a tribe, to me, that kind of waters down the ability of any one tribe to really take hold in any meaningful way. Maybe Trump is like, or BLM, right? Or any of these things, like there are some anomalies there, right? Where people really do go out and protest or raid the Capitol building or whatever, right? Like, but I think, for most of these tribes, like it's fairly watered down. And so then if you take that back to religion of like, well, okay, that one religion that kind of dominated the US for a long time, at least in its sort of institution, from where it was founded, Christianity, right, has kind of broken down. Right now, we have lots of religions in this country. I mean, we probably always did, right? But like, and now, right, there's a lot of commercial religions as well. To me, like where that's led us, and kind of one of my criticisms of this whole geopolitical lens of Balaji's network state thesis is that I don't think there are very many people who would actually like die for the cause. Like I think these like religions that we're talking about are mostly passive, they're mostly commercial, they're mostly like kind of entertainment in a lot of ways. And when push comes to shove, like when we actually have to quote unquote die for the cause, when you have to actually like start cordoning off city blocks and arresting people and that kind of thing and fighting, I actually think most people don't really care. And I think to go back to something like January 6th, I think this is kind of why it felt like a LARP, is that none of those people actually wanted to like fight. They just thought they were like at a carnival, right? Like they thought they were just like having fun. And so I don't know. I'm not sure I'm making like a specific point there, only to say like I think like, yeah, these like religions, the great tribe, like that whole thing. I think one of the issues, one of the kind of criticisms is that, you know, like people have a lot of tribes, they have a lot of nuances, and I don't know that any one of them is really, you know, gonna be enough to sort of break through.
So Matt, maybe that's the evidence or argument for, in terms of likely outcome, partition, not civil war.
Yeah. I mean, well, partition in what sense, right?
Just like this separation of people by tribes, and does it eventually come to then kind of political boundaries that then become state boundaries?
I don't even think that's like, maybe it could happen with red and blue, but I think it's really hard to do that. Like, look at California, right? My I hope he doesn't watch this, right? But my father, you know, has well, so my father has talked about my family's like kind of a little bit more conservative than, especially than San Francisco, right? And my father's talked about, like, you know, moving to California and about the politics of California. And one thing that I have to often remind him of is that actually, like, a lot of California is red, right? You know, San Francisco is very blue, right? But most of California is actually red by geography. And so I don't need, like, maybe San Francisco secedes from the state and then the state secedes from the nation. But like, it just, to actually partition these things, to me, feels very difficult to do, like at a city level, at a state level, at a national level. And then, right, if you go back to this idea of many religions, like okay, red and blue could maybe partition, but like, how do you partition like the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of eventual mini religions that we'll have in the country and the world? Like, I don't know. It just starts to kind of break down for me a little bit.
Yeah. One thing, Matt, like I do think one interesting thing about Balaji's latest statement is that his thought experiment did include a somewhat concrete and like lightly graphic depiction of what it might look like for this movement to get going. And there were fun versions of it with like the Gray Pride Parade, right? Like there's kind of like, that's the positive fun. I mean, Balaji is like, he's literally like Alexander Hamilton, but like Lin-Manuel Miranda's Alexander Hamilton like came to life, and he's like living right now doing stuff. I mean, his turns of phrase are incredible.
Quips. Yeah.
I mean, he's just his phrasing is fantastic.
Correct.
But like he gave this one thing that, like, if you really think about it, it's somewhat troubling, which is like, who are the police going to side with, right? Like, so Balaji's making a case that police are closer to gray than blue. And which is weird because it's sort of blue lives matter, but like blue as he's defining it with like liberal, right? Like with the sort of chaos in the streets through overly permissive governance. So like Balaji's kind of implying if force needs to be used, the force always comes through a human being. That human being typically on the ground is the police force, like unless the national military is coming in. And so, like, who are police going to side with if there's a contention about what's happening at a certain building or what's happening in the streets? Are they going to side with the people who are trying to improve and invest in the city? Or are they going to side with the people who are allowing the city to become chaotic so that they can maintain their, you know, small positions of bureaucratic authority? And I think Balaji's making an argument that force on the local level will side with the grays. But like the implication of that is that Balaji's thinking about force being used, right? Like, I mean, this is a somewhat controversial point, in my opinion, because he's envisioning what does it look like for something more of a fight to happen, right? Because like, so I did think that was an interesting element. Balaji's making a positive vision, but there are twinges of like, you know, what would it look like if there's actual conflict of physical bodies about these ideas and those things that are happening. And like, I don't know what the answer is to all that, but like the fact that he's painting that picture for us of what it could look like, I think shows like he's not just talking about like, oh, you're going to have this as a hobby. I do think he is talking about like people believing in internet values, grave values so much that they do like physically put their body on the line, you know, in certain instances of like, you know, fights for jurisdictions and land and, you know, laws and what's going to happen. So, I mean, this was really interesting. Your all's question, I think the thing that you guys are questioning, or many of you I hear, is sort of like, does anybody really care that much? Is anybody going to risk life and limb to further and develop internet values in San Francisco? Or I hear some skepticism from people about whether we're there yet or even close to it.
So, okay, so like I said, I am a self-proclaimed internet values person. I strongly believe that. I'm also a Pakistani, so the whole like, would you die for a cause? There are actually a lot of people that would die for certain causes. I think one of the things that I have learned in my post-founder journey is that leadership and courage are very difficult things, especially when you want to tackle really big problems, because violence is real. Like, people will use violence if they want, if they need it, if they believe it, if there's a herd effect. Like, there will be violence. And like, I think it's naive to assume that that would not happen. One of my life goal is to find ways to basically free Pakistan. Pakistan goes through a lot of problems, and there are a lot of people that are suffering under certain value systems. I watched a video on Afghanistan today, and Afghanistan wants to talk about certain values, but like what's actually happening on the ground, they talk about like the reason why they don't give people women's education is because, well, what if the women learn things that go against what we believe, and then we have destabilization in our country? Like, people are willing to use violence on the other end. And so I think, like, to Tim's point, like, again, this is kind of controversial, but like, you kind of need defense systems against people who may or may not be willing to use violence against you. And I am not pro-violence. I like, generally, I think Adrienne kind of talked about this. We were talking about this on the podcast, but like, I actually don't want people to fight. Like, I would prefer unity and peace. Like, I actually would be very happy with a gray, blue, red world where we can kind of figure out how to live together rather than sort of fight each other. But we can't forget that violence is real, and it like it's used across the world all the time. Right? To be non-US centric.
Yeah, I hear Matthew.
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just going to say, I hear Matthew make just a quick comment because I want to hear Ishika's thought. I just heard Matthew making like a practical case, which was sort of like, yeah, like violence is pretty serious, and I'm not sure that I see the commitment to what we're defining as tribes to be like condensed and passionate enough to be there yet, where it's to the level of I don't know, Matthew, if I was interpreting your point correctly or not.
I think that's pretty accurate, especially in San Francisco. Like, I mean, I live here. Like, I think most of Twitter is like overly dramatized. Like, it's pretty great here. I mean, there's definitely problems for sure. And for what it's worth, right, Balaji lives all halfway around the world, right? So just keep that in mind, right? Now, but Tim, right, he does suggest, right, like actual like police enforcement and like literally cordoning places off. So he's definitely suggesting that kind of thing. I guess what I was suggesting was more so that like I don't think these like wealthy tech people that live here with their families are going to get out and like, you know, blazing with guns and start fighting. Like, most people just want safety, right? Like, it's like not like a hard thing to ask for. Like,
Matt,
go ahead.
but the wealthy tech folks may not be out with their guns, but based on their values and their religion, they may be fine to find people, right? These are the people who are in search of a religion. And they may not even come from internet values, but they may find some fighters.
Yeah,
Go
or
fight
they
their
might just like
battles.
hire private security, right? Like,
Well, yeah.
like you know, like that I could see happening. And in fact, I live in a neighborhood where there actually is it's not private police, but they have like their own park police basically. That's not even city police. So that I could see, but yeah, I don't know. It's harder. Like, because I live here, it's harder for me to see like this. A lot of this happening, I guess. Maybe is the.
But
the
isn't
way
that the Balaji, like he's seeing the future that you're not seeing?
Well, I mean, to some
10
degree,
years?
but I don't know. I tend to like with a lot of like the stuff that Balaji says. Like, I tend to think he's like, he's right. I think directionally about just about everything. Sometimes I feel like he kind of stretches it a little bit.
Yeah, his vector strength might be a little stronger than might be real in that moment.
But and this gets back to kind of my point on the tribes part. Sorry, go ahead, Adrienne.
No, sorry, I was just saying, like, I'm just of the opinion of like forcing your ideals on someone works only in the short term.
Correct.
Ever. Period. Hard stop. Like, so you can win and you can get in power, but when the pendulum swings back, it swings back with force.
You can grab power with force. You cannot retain power with force.
Yeah, and one thing just in Balaji's defense and the use, like Balaji's depiction of possible moments of violence or force, I don't remember him ever saying anything about like a preemptive or proactive use of force by Greys. I think he was trying to paint that like if Greys were, if there was, force used against them, like the police force brought against something that Greys were trying to do that went along with their values, when that push comes to shove from the outside coming in, what might happen. But even though he's not advocating violence, not at all, like, but I think it's like he's also previewing that like this could become serious enough that there is like some physical risk, right? Like just like when people are marching in the street, there's a risk that they're taking to do that. There may be a similar kind of risk with what Balaji's advocating for the Greys. And I think he's trying to paint a picture of, I have a positive vision about how we could come out on the right side of that, because like these cops might like us more than they do the people who they think are evidently ruining the city and also don't respect, enforcement likely in either their rhetoric or their actions. So Balaji's, I don't think he's inciting anything. He's not doing, but I think he's trying to preview it, but he's also giving us a sense of, hey, this could become really serious. And then I hear people wondering, like, does the passion exist to that level yet? Like, I come from Kentucky, so I see people who are in red states, what they feel about blue state infringement, and people who are in blue states or blue cities, what they feel about red state infringement. And that to me does not seem super far off from physical force being a possible, being a possible element here, right? So like forgetting Greys, like the red-blue thing that's going on in the US, like I would argue that it kind of reminds me of religion, because religion is about, I made a leap of faith and now I fit facts to my faith. And that's like the way religion operates compared to empiricism. And to me, the ideology has become so strong in the US that it's like, okay, what did Fauci say? I hate that. What did Biden say? I hate that. Or what did Trump say? I automatically love that. I automatically hate that. It's so ad hominem that it reminds me of like a religion of people that you believe within this ideology, and you fit all of your facts in the world to your opinions about the side that somebody's on. So like it does to me resemble religion, even if it's not definitionally similar for red-blue. I think Gray, Balaji's trying to squeeze Gray in there as like, kind of part of the fight. Whereas I actually like, I can see what he feels about the red blue stuff. I mean, these people hate each other, right? Like, I mean, they really, really hate each other. I can tell you from Kentucky, it's like the idea of people from California or New York telling people in Kentucky what they can and can't do is like really, really offensive. Like,
Correct.
they hate it. If those people were marching by, like, there would be fights, right? Like, I mean, so I mean, this stuff, it is, you know, especially with Trump probably coming back into office in 2024, like, we're going to have to deal with all this stuff again.
Yeah, I don't know if I can kind of see a lot. I used to live in South Carolina, and I can tell you that Tim is correct. That as people like to call them, the coastal elites who try to tell us how to live our lives. So I know that we it's 4 o'clock, so I know that we kind of set this for 3 to 4. So kind of want to be mindful of everyone's time. I kind of just want to go around the room and do like closing statements. So if anybody wants to like go ahead and kick it off for like a closing statement, or like just what you think.
Diab, you can go ahead.
Okay,
You can
cool.
start off.
So I like I mentioned earlier, like I'm pro unity. I'm not really pro division. I understand where division comes from, and I think it's okay for people to, as long as there's like unity at the top, I'm kind of okay in like divisional thinking, where it's like, hey, I have to have these unique set of values. Like, you kind of need humans to express themselves completely, and that means they have to have a certain set of values. But as long as we have like global unity, so I actually think people are probably more gray than they are blue and red. It's just that our options are not. The gray option is just not available. I think I would argue that the average, and I'm going back to being U.S. centric. I think the average American does not want this much division in the country. They just want to have a job that pays well, to be able to feed their kids, to be able to go live a decent life, be able to buy a home, go to the park, and like do normal things that like everyone cares about. But like potholes and the roads are fixed, and like that's just kind of what everyone wants. And like, what does it take to accomplish that? Like, that's what I am for. I'm like, not like, I would never instigate and be like, we need more division, we need more polarization. I am definitely much more of the, how can we come together and realize that, yes, there are people on the extreme, but like, let's get some unity, get some shit done, make everyone's lives better, and like move forward from there. Like, that's kind of my perspective, and that's what I would always argue for. That's it.
Cool. I mean,
Yeah,
I
maybe
feel
just to
like
continue. Oh,
go ahead. You guys go ahead.
someone go.
Matt, who wants to go?
Well, I guess just to continue on Type's point, I mean, I generally agree. I think like I'm pro unity, anti bureaucracy, but pro unity. I also say, like, to Tim's point, wrapping up, like, I have, like I mentioned, a lot of conservative family members, and I definitely see what you're talking about as well, even though they're mostly in New Hampshire, and so mostly close to the coast. But yeah, I mean, I go back to the point before, like, I think this religion thing, like I think most of the religions are very, very watered down, and there will be many of them. And so then the question is, you know, which ones will break through, and maybe, right, like Trump, the religion breaks through, right? Maybe, you know, progressive left breaks through. But I think generally most people just want to live their lives. And maybe that's the essence of the gray tribe, is like just have a functioning society. That said, it only takes a few people in one corner to incite things, and so it doesn't take a majority, right? As we know from history, and so, you know, not great. But yeah, I don't really know what to predict beyond that. So thanks, guys, for getting on the call. It's fun.
Great.
Yeah,
Adrienne.
super interesting topic.
Oh, sorry. I heard Adrienne talk before, so I was like, okay, Adrienne, do you want to go? But then Tim, sure, you can go ahead.
Whoever, all right, my quick closing comments, and I'll try to maybe articulate what I see as my gray values or internet values. I'm kind of doing this on the fly, so I haven't thought about it much, but pro entrepreneurship and capitalism, pro nerd and science, pro positive sum over negative sum, or zero sum. I guess no one's going to get behind negative sum, but so it's really who are the people looking to build and create and not take away. Pro humanity. So what are we doing to try to lift the tide for, tides for all people? And I think that's also why I think I've really identified with a lot of the gray values. Where I tend to get lost once I hear kind of Balaji doing the, come on, let's like really organize, is when I think of like who are the heroes of the gray tribe. There tends to be like a little regressive women talk track, especially when you hear the grays talking about population decline, which I'm not against having those conversations, but it typically like just kind of reverts back to like, it feels like, hey, man's got to work the 100 hours a week and grind, and we need the women to have the babies, and I have issues with that. By the way, I have 3 kids, so I'm doing my part for population. So I think I can actually speak on this. So all that to say, like, how do I just continue to really push these values, but also be true to my own heart?
Love that. Tim, go ahead.
I mean, I think I love all the questions were in. We feel like we could do like 10 of these. I mean, there's a lot here. And I'd say that for me, the fact that Balaji's raising these questions is hugely valuable, right? Like, just like agree with it, don't or not, but like we're all here talking about it, and there's a lot to dig into. Like, he's lighting something, and I respect that Balaji is not just talking. I read a lot of political philosophers, but like to see somebody finding something innovative and like he thinks the world's going in a certain direction, and he's like out there thinking about it and talking about it and trying to inspire action, like it's super interesting. And I think is like net very positive, like, because it's getting people to think more globally, to question like nation state first thinking, which I think is awesome. I just like, I think if we always separate like Balaji's core vision of like ideas that people have being able to be the thing that brings them together and binds them, instead of only physical, it doesn't have to replace physical, but just like complementing it. I try to always keep that in mind. And I think of everything that Balaji's doing as an entrepreneurial experiment. Hey, I'm going to try gray now. I'm going to try the Bitcoin bet. I'm going to try, network state book. I'm going to try he's seeing if anything can catch, in my opinion. So I don't know, with everything Balaji's doing, I'm trying to treat it as an experiment of tactic. And then but remember like the big picture of what he's vouching for is like super interesting, and like seeing novel political philosophies is very rare. So like I love to see what he's doing and follow it, and like I'm glad he's hanging out on Farcaster, and he like sometimes replies to what we're talking about.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think I generally agree with like all of you guys, especially you, Adrienne, with like overall thoughts. I think I like what Balaji's saying in terms of the direction he's going with the Gray Tribe. I think my like closing statement would just be like 2 or 3 like open questions. I haven't seen the rest of the episode, so I'm not sure if he addresses it there, but like, can the Gray Tribe, instead of inserting itself between or like alongside the blue and red, can it be a bridge for blue and red? Can people unite through this bridge of the Gray Tribe and internet values? That could be a possibility that I find very interesting, and I want to hear his take on that. And then like second, pro-humanity, like you said, Adrienne. He talks a lot about like what wealthy people can do, but there's so many problems. You have like homeless people, uneducated people. Like, what about that? So I think, how can this Gray Tribe encompass these problems as well? Again, another open question, but I think generally he's going in this very interesting direction that I definitely want to, stay aligned with and like probably follow upon. But yeah, that was my closing argument there. But yes, thank you all. This was amazing. I learned a lot. Very
Yeah,
interesting
I really
takes.
could go for another few hours, but I
Yeah.
also need to go get a workout in.
Balaji,
Otherwise,
Definitely not.
Trish is just
All
gonna
right,
give me
everyone.
crap on unlonely chat because if I don't go work out.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Tim. You guys are lovely. Definitely have you
Yes, you
guys
guys are
back.
great.
Yeah.
thank you guys. This is awesome.
I'm sure
Awesome.
we'll keep doing this.
We'll definitely keep doing this, but I'm excited for the next episodes. I'm gonna go watch those. We can discuss those again as well.
Yeah, I'm about to go listen while I work out. So.
All right. Thank you
Yeah,
guys.
super fun.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
thanks for the invite, guys. Have a great day.
Bye. You too.